Mrs. Thompson, you have exactly 60 seconds to gather your belongings and vacate this property before I call the sheriff. My name is Martha Warren Thompson, and those words, spoken by my own mother-in-law on the marble steps of what used to be my home, should have broken me. They were meant to. But standing there that cold November morning, my 5-year-old daughter Leah clutching my hand, and my 2-year-old son Blake heavy on my hip, I made myself a promise. One day, that woman would choke on every syllable she ever spat at me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about karma. Real karma. Not the pretty kind people post about on social media with sunset backgrounds and inspirational fonts. I'm talking about the kind that grows silent and patient in the dark, that waits for the perfect moment to rise up and swallow whole everyone who thought they buried you. This is the story of how I went from a widow with nothing but a rotting cottage and 2 hungry babies, to the woman who owned everything my husband's family ever cherished. And it started the day they threw me away like garbage. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated or cast aside, stay with me. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that the people who bury you don't always realize they're planting seeds. Because that's exactly what the Thompson family did to me. But let me start from the beginning. I was 24 years old when I met Benjamin Thompson. Young, hopeful, working double shifts at County General Hospital as a nurse. I believed in love. I believed in hard work. I believed that if you gave everything you had to the people you cared about, they'd protect you when you needed it most. I was wrong about that last part. Benjamin was different from his family. Or at least I thought he was. He saw me, really saw me, in a way that made me feel like maybe I wasn't invisible after all. He was 32, kind, gentle, with eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He didn't care that I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in the poorest part of town, or that my mama cleaned houses for a living before she passed, or that I was the first person in my family to finish college. He loved me anyway, or so he said. We got married on a Saturday in May. Small ceremony. His family didn't come. Not his mother Doris, not his father Richard, not his sister Vivian. They made their position crystal clear when Benjamin told them about our engagement. You're throwing away your legacy for a black girl from the projects, Doris had said. I wasn't there, but Benjamin told me later, his voice shaking with anger and shame. The Thompson name means something in this town, Benjamin. It has for 5 generations. And you want to drag it through the mud for what? A pretty face. Richard had been more direct. Marry her and you're cut off. No inheritance. No position in the company. Nothing. Benjamin married me anyway. For 6 years, we built a life. Not the life his family had planned for him, but ours. We lived in a small rental house on the east side of town. Benjamin worked construction during the day and took online classes at night to finish his business degree. I kept working at the hospital, and together we saved every penny we could. Then Leah came. 5 pounds, 7 ounces of pure joy with Benjamin's smile and my determined chin. She made everything worth it. The long hours, the tight budget, the way people in this small southern town looked at us when we walked down the street together. 3 years later, Blake arrived. He looked just like his daddy. Same warm brown eyes, same gentle spirit. Benjamin's family never met either of them. Not once. Doris sent exactly 1 item when Leah was born. A card with a typewritten note that said, "Some mistakes cannot be undone, but perhaps they can be learned from." I kept that card. I don't know why. Maybe I knew I'd need the anger later. Everything changed on a Tuesday in October. Benjamin had reconnected with his father 6 months earlier. Richard had called out of nowhere, said he wanted to make amends, that he was getting older and regretted the estrangement. Benjamin was desperate to believe him. He wanted his children to know their grandparents. He wanted to bridge the gap that had cost him so much. I was skeptical, but I saw the hope in my husband's eyes, and I couldn't take that away from him. Richard invited Benjamin to the mansion, the Thompson estate, a sprawling property on 200 acres of prime land just outside town. The house itself was a monument to old money, with white columns and a circular driveway and windows that caught the sunset like they were made of gold. Benjamin went alone. "Let me test the waters first," he said, kissing my forehead. "If it goes well, I'll bring you and the kids next time. There was no next time. The state police knocked on my door at 11:30 that night. Benjamin's truck had gone off Highway 47, straight through the guardrail and into the ravine below. They said he died on impact. They said alcohol was involved, that his blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. I knew my husband. Benjamin didn't drink. Not after watching his uncle destroy himself with a bottle. Not ever. But the toxicology report didn't lie, they said. The evidence didn't lie. I buried my husband on a gray Thursday morning. 27 people came to the funeral. None of them were Thompsons. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought grief was the deepest pain I'd ever know. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I received a formal letter on cream-colored stationery with the Thompson family crest embossed at the top. It was from Harrison and Associates, the most expensive law firm in the county. You are hereby summoned to the reading of Richard Benjamin Thompson Sr.'s last will and testament, to take place at the Thompson estate at 10 o'clock on Saturday, November 12th. Your attendance is mandatory as you are named in the document. My hands shook as I read it. Richard had died. When? How? Why hadn't anyone told me? I called the law firm. The receptionist was cold and efficient. Mr. Thompson Sr. passed away November 3rd. The family requested a private funeral. The will reading is scheduled as stated. Do you require directions to the estate? November 3rd. 5 days after I buried Benjamin. Something felt wrong. Terribly, deeply wrong. But I had no choice. If I was named in the will, maybe Richard had tried to make things right. Maybe there was something for Leah and Blake, some acknowledgement that they were his grandchildren. I needed that money. Benjamin's life insurance had barely covered the funeral. I had exactly $412 in our checking account and rent due in 2 weeks. I dressed carefully that Saturday morning. My only good black dress, the one I'd worn to Benjamin's funeral. I braided Leah's hair and put Blake in his nicest outfit, a little button-up shirt Benjamin's co-worker had given us when Blake was born. The drive to the Thompson estate took 30 minutes. Every mile felt like driving into enemy territory. The mansion looked exactly like Benjamin had described it. Imposing. Beautiful. Cold. I parked my 12-year-old Honda Civic in the circular driveway, right between a Mercedes and a Lexus. A man in a suit, an actual butler, opened the front door before I could knock. "Mrs. Thompson?" he said, his eyes sliding over me and the children with barely concealed distaste. "You're expected in the library. Follow me." The inside of the house was exactly what you'd expect from people who'd rather disown their son than let him marry for love. Crystal chandeliers. Antique furniture. Portraits of stern white faces staring down from every wall. The library was worse. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk, leather chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. And sitting in those chairs were the Thompsons. Doris sat in the center like a queen on a throne. 68 years old with silver hair pulled back, so tight it probably hurt. Wearing a black dress that cost more than I made in 3 months. Her face was all sharp angles and sharper judgment. Next to her was Vivian, Benjamin's older sister. 40 years old, blonde, beautiful in that polished way that comes from expensive salons and even more expensive dermatologists. She looked at me the way you'd look at a roach crawling across your kitchen counter. The silver-haired man stood. "I'm Gerald Harrison, executor of Richard Thompson's estate. Mrs. Martha Thompson, please be seated." There was only one empty chair. At the far end, away from the family. I sat down, Leah pressing close to my side, Blake squirming in my lap. "Can we begin?" Doris said, not looking at me. "I'd like to conclude this unpleasant business as quickly as possible." Gerald opened a leather folder. The last will and testament of Richard Benjamin Thompson Sr., executed October 28th of this year. Wait, October 28th. 4 days after Benjamin died. Being of sound mind and body, I hereby distribute my earthly possessions as follows. Gerald's voice was flat, professional, completely detached from the devastation he was about to deliver. To my beloved daughter, Vivian Louise Thompson, I leave the Thompson Manufacturing Company, all associated assets, accounts, and holdings, valued at approximately $8 million. Vivian smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. To my beloved wife, Doris Marie Thompson, I leave the Thompson estate, including the main house, all furnishings, the vehicles, and 200 acres of land, along with a trust fund of $3 million to maintain the property and ensure her comfort for the remainder of her life. My stomach dropped. This was Benjamin's inheritance. The inheritance his parents had threatened to withhold if he married me. And now that he was dead. To my daughter-in-law, Martha Warren Thompson, and her children. Gerald paused, and I saw something flicker across his face. Discomfort? Pity. I leave the cottage property located at the southeastern corner of the estate, commonly known as the old groundskeeper's cottage, along with its contents and the 3 acres of land it sits upon. Silence. Then Vivian laughed. Actually laughed. The groundskeeper's cottage? She said. Father, even in death, you had a sense of humor. Doris didn't laugh. She just stared at me with something that looked like satisfaction. Is that all? I managed to say. My voice sounded strange. Distant. Gerald looked uncomfortable. There is one additional clause. The cottage property is transferred with the condition that Mrs. Martha Thompson and her children vacate the main estate premises immediately and permanently. Any attempt to contest this will result in immediate forfeiture of the cottage property. I don't live on the estate, I said. I live. The clause stands regardless, Gerald interrupted. Mr. Thompson wanted to be clear that you are to have no claim to any other Thompson property or assets. The cottage is your sole inheritance. I looked at Doris. She was smiling now. Not a warm smile. A satisfied one. The cottage hasn't been used in 30 years, Vivian said, examining her manicured nails. Last I checked, half the roof was gone and there's black mold in every room. But I suppose it's better than nothing. Is it though? Doris said softly. That's when I understood. This wasn't an inheritance. This was an insult. A final, deliberate humiliation. They had given me garbage and called it mercy. I should have walked out. I should have taken my children and left that library with whatever dignity I had remaining. But I needed to understand. I needed to know how the man who'd called his son, who'd supposedly wanted to reconcile, could do this. Why? The word came out before I could stop it. Doris turned to look at me for the first time since I'd entered the room. Her eyes were ice blue and completely empty of warmth. Why what, dear? Why did Richard reach out to Benjamin? Why did he invite him to the estate that night if this was always the plan? Something flickered across Vivian's face. Something that looked almost like guilt. But it was gone in an instant. My husband wanted to make peace with his son before he died, Doris said. He invited Benjamin to discuss the future. Unfortunately, Benjamin made certain choices that evening that led to tragic consequences. Benjamin didn't drink, I said. My voice was shaking now. He never drank. Not once in 6 years. The toxicology report says otherwise, Gerald interjected smoothly. Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're grieving, but the facts are clear. Your husband had a blood alcohol content of 0.16 when he crashed. The investigation is closed. Investigation? I stood up, Blake nearly sliding off my lap. What investigation? The police told me it was an accident. They never said. Mrs. Thompson. Doris's voice cut through the room like a blade. My husband is dead. My son is dead. This family has suffered enough without your hysterics. You've received your inheritance. I suggest you take it and go. My hysterics. Heat flooded my face. Your son just died. My husband just died. And you're sitting here dividing up money like he never existed. Benjamin made his choice when he married you, Vivian said coldly. He chose poverty and disgrace over family and legacy. That was his decision. He loved me. Love. Doris said the word like it tasted rotten. Benjamin was always too soft, too emotional, too willing to throw away everything meaningful for temporary feelings. You were a mistake, Mrs. Thompson. A beautiful, unfortunate mistake that cost my son everything. Leah whimpered next to me. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She understood that the grandmother she'd never met was saying terrible things about her mother. I picked up my daughter's hand and stood. Blake was crying now, picking up on the tension. The cottage, I said. Where is it? Gerald pulled out a map and marked a location with his pen. 3 miles down the estate road, past the stables. You can't miss it. There's a key in the door. And the deed will be filed with the county clerk's office Monday morning. The property transfers to you immediately. I took the map. My hands were steady now. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder. Something harder. One more thing, Dora said as I reached the library door. The cottage is on Thompson land, which means you'll be living on my property. I want to make something very clear, Martha. She stood, smoothing down her expensive black dress. You are not welcome in this house. You are not welcome at family gatherings. You are not a Thompson, and those children, she gestured at Leah and Blake like they were objects, not people, are not my grandchildren. As far as this family is concerned, Benjamin died childless. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. One day, I said quietly, you're going to regret this. Doris smiled. I doubt that very much. I carried Blake and held Leah's hand as I walked back through that beautiful house with its crystal chandeliers and its portraits of people who thought their blood made them better than mine. The butler didn't walk us out. He just watched from the doorway as I loaded my children into my beat-up car. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. Mama. Leah's small voice came from the back seat. Are we going home now? Home. Our rental house where I'd already received an eviction notice because I couldn't make rent. The home I was going to lose in 2 weeks. We're going to see our new house, baby, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. It's a cottage, like in a fairy tale. The lie tasted bitter. I followed Gerald's map down a long, winding road that cut through the Thompson estate, past perfectly manicured gardens, past a stable with horses that probably cost more than my car, past a pond with a gazebo that looked like something from a magazine. And then the road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to barely a path at all. The cottage sat at the edge of the property, hidden behind overgrown trees and 30 years of neglect. And it was worse than Vivian had described. The roof wasn't half gone. It was 3/4 gone. The windows were either broken or missing entirely. The door hung crooked on its hinges. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left, like it was tired of standing. This was what they'd given me. This was what Benjamin's life had been worth to his family. I got out of the car slowly. The November wind cut through my thin coat. Mama, is this really our house? Leah asked, her voice small and scared. For now, baby. For now. The key was in the door, just like Gerald said. It took 3 tries to turn it. The door groaned open, and the smell hit me immediately. Mold. Rot. Decades of decay. The inside was a single large room with a fireplace on one end and a tiny kitchen area on the other. There was a doorway leading to what must have been a bedroom, and another door that probably led to a bathroom. The floor was covered in leaves and dirt, and things I didn't want to identify. The walls were water-stained and peeling. The ceiling was sagging in multiple places, exposing rotted beams and sky. There was no electricity, no running water, no heat. This wasn't a house. It was a death sentence wrapped in legal paperwork. Leah started crying. Blake was already crying, and I wanted to cry too. I wanted to sit down in that filthy room and give up, but I couldn't, because I was all my children had left. It's okay, I said, pulling them close. We're going to be okay. Mama's going to fix this. I promise. Another lie. But what else could I say? I spent the next 3 hours trying to make the cottage livable enough for one night. I cleared the leaves and debris from one corner of the main room. I found some old tarps in what used to be a shed outside, and used them to create a makeshift tent over our sleeping area to keep out the wind. We had no food, no blankets, no way to stay warm except to huddle together. As the sun set and the temperature dropped, I held my children close and tried to remember how to pray. My mama had been a praying woman. She'd believed that God never gave you more than you could handle. But sitting in that ruined cottage with my babies shivering against me, I couldn't help but think that God had seriously overestimated my capacity. The next morning, I drove into town to buy supplies. I had $400 to my name. I needed to make it last. I went to Morrison's General Store, the only grocery store within 15 miles. I filled a cart with the cheapest food I could find. Bread, peanut butter, crackers, milk for the kids. I added a pack of plastic plates and cups, some basic cleaning supplies, and 2 cheap blankets. The total came to $87. I handed the cashier my debit card. She swiped it, then swiped it again, then looked at me with barely concealed pity. "It's declined, honey. That's not possible. I have $400 in that account." She tried again. Same result. "Do you have another card?" I didn't. I'd never needed one. Benjamin and I had shared one account, and after he died, I'd made sure his name was removed and mine was the only one on it. "Can you check the reason?" My voice was shaking. She typed something into her computer, then frowned. "It says the account is frozen. You'll need to contact your bank." I left the cart right there in the middle of the store and drove to First National Bank, my heart pounding. The bank manager, a thin man named Robert Crane, looked at me with the same expression everyone in this town seemed to have mastered. Polite, cold, dismissive. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry, but there's been a claim filed against your account." "A claim? By who?" "The Thompson estate. They're alleging that certain funds in your account may have been improperly transferred from estate accounts prior to Mr. Richard Thompson's death." "That's insane. This is my money. Benjamin and I saved every penny." "I understand your frustration, but until the matter is resolved in court, the account remains frozen. It's standard procedure in estate disputes." "How long will that take?" He shifted uncomfortably. "These things can take months, sometimes years." I stared at him. "I have 2 children. I have no money. How am I supposed to feed my kids?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. My hands are tied." I walked out of that bank in a daze. The Thompsons hadn't just given me a rotting cottage. They'd taken everything else too. They'd made sure I had nothing. I spent the next week trying to survive on the $23 in cash I had in my wallet. I bought the cheapest food I could find. I filled jugs with water from a gas station bathroom. I burned wood from fallen trees in the cottage fireplace to keep us warm. Leah stopped asking when we'd go back to our real house. Blake got quieter, his usual babbling replaced by silence. I applied for jobs. Every hospital, every clinic, every doctor's office within driving distance. I was a registered nurse with 6 years of experience and excellent references. No one would hire me. On the 8th day, I ran out of money completely. I had $3.16. Not enough to buy bread. Not enough to buy milk. I swallowed my pride and went back to Morrison's General Store. Maybe they'd let me buy on credit, just until I got a job, just until I could access my bank account. The owner, Daniel Morrison, was a man in his 60s with a kind face that had served this community for 40 years. "Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you something." He smiled. "What can I do for you, Martha?" The fact that he used my first name, that he didn't look at me like I was dirt, almost made me cry. "I need food for my kids. I can pay you back, I swear. I'm waiting for my bank account to be unfrozen, and I've got job applications out. I just need a little help until." His face changed. The kindness drained away. "I'm sorry, Martha. I can't do that. Please. My daughter is 5 years old. She's hungry. I just need." I said no. His voice was firm now. "Final. I can't extend credit to you." "Why not?" "You know me. I've been shopping here for years." "Because Doris Thompson called me 3 days ago," he said quietly. "She told me that if I extended you any credit, any help at all, she'd pull her account from my store. The Thompsons do $60,000 of business with me every year. I have employees. I have bills. I can't afford to lose that." The room spun. "She called you. She called everyone, Martha. Every store, every business in town. You won't get credit anywhere. And honestly," he looked genuinely sorry now, "most of the businesses around here depend on Thompson money in one way or another. No one's going to risk that for." He stopped. "For someone like me," I finished. He didn't deny it. I walked out of that store and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes. This wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated destruction. Doris Thompson was making sure I couldn't survive. She was starving me out. That night, Leah cried herself to sleep because her stomach hurt from hunger. Blake was running a fever, but I had no medicine and no way to take him to a doctor. I held them both and stared at the ceiling of that ruined cottage, at the holes that let in the cold November wind, and I made a decision. I would not let my children die in this place. I would not let Doris Thompson win. I would survive. And then I would make them pay for every single moment of suffering they'd caused. I just didn't know how yet. The breaking point came on day 12. Blake's fever had gotten worse. His little body was burning up, and he wouldn't eat the last of the crackers I'd managed to stretch across 3 days. Leah sat in the corner of the cottage, too weak to play, just staring at the wall with empty eyes. I had no choice. I had to take Blake to the hospital. County General was where I'd worked for 6 years, where I'd saved lives, comforted families, held hands of dying patients, where I'd been respected. I carried Blake through those familiar sliding doors, and the moment the triage nurse saw me, her expression changed. Martha, Lisa Chen had been my friend once. We'd worked night shifts together, shared coffee during breaks, complained about doctors who thought nurses were invisible. "What are you doing here?" "My son. He's been running a fever for 3 days. He won't eat, won't drink. Please, Lisa. I think he has pneumonia." She looked at Blake, then back at me. "Do you have insurance?" My stomach dropped. I had insurance through Benjamin's job. They said I'd have coverage for 6 months after his death. It shouldn't expire until. "Let me check." She typed into her computer, and I watched her face change. "Martha, it says here your coverage was terminated November 15th. That was 2 weeks ago." "That's wrong. They told me 6 months. I have the paperwork. The insurance company can terminate coverage if employment ended due to certain circumstances. It says here the termination was approved by the employer." "What employer?" "Benjamin died. He didn't quit." Lisa looked uncomfortable. "It says Thompson Manufacturing." Of course it did. Vivian owned Thompson Manufacturing now. She'd made sure I couldn't even keep my dead husband's insurance. "I don't have money for the emergency room fee," I said. My voice cracked. "But please, Lisa. He's 2 years old. He's sick. I'm a nurse. I know what pneumonia looks like. If we don't treat it..." "I'm sorry, Martha. I can't admit him without insurance or payment up front. Emergency room policy." "Since when?" "We treated uninsured patients all the time when I worked here. Policy changed last week. New hospital administration." She lowered her voice. "Martha, you should leave. Dr. Patterson is on duty tonight, and he's on the Thompson Foundation board. If he sees you here..." "What's going on here?" A voice cut through the waiting room. Dr. James Patterson, tall, gray-haired, with the kind of confidence that came from 30 years of people calling him God. "Dr. Patterson, I was just explaining to Mrs. Thompson that without insurance..." "Mrs. Thompson?" He looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. "You're trespassing. You don't work here anymore." "I'm not here to work. My son is sick. He needs a parent who can afford medical care." Patterson's voice was cold. "You want charity? Go to the free clinic in the city. That's what it's there for. The free clinic is 40 miles away. I don't have gas money. Please just look at him. You're a doctor. And you're a woman who should have thought about her children's welfare before making poor life choices." He turned to Lisa. "If she's not gone in 60 seconds, call security." I stood there, Blake burning up in my arms, and felt something inside me shatter. "Benjamin was your friend," I said quietly. "You went to medical school together. You were at our wedding." "Benjamin was a disappointment," Patterson said, "just like his father suspected. Now leave before I have you arrested for trespassing." I left. What choice did I have? I drove to the free clinic in the city. It took an hour with traffic. Blake was barely conscious by the time I arrived. The clinic was packed. The wait time was 4 hours, but they didn't turn us away. A young doctor, fresh out of residency, diagnosed Blake with pneumonia and an ear infection. She prescribed antibiotics and gave me samples because she could see I had no money for the pharmacy. "He should be okay," she said gently. "But you caught it just in time. Another day or two, and we'd be looking at hospitalization." Another day or two. I'd almost waited too long because I had no money and no one would help me. I drove home in the dark, Blake finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, and I realized something. The Thompsons weren't just cruel. They were trying to kill me. Maybe not literally, but they were systematically removing every option, every support, every possibility of survival. They wanted me to disappear, to leave town. to give up, and I almost had. When I pulled up to the cottage that night, there was a black Mercedes parked in front. My heart started racing. The Thompsons drove Mercedes. Doris stood by the cottage door, pristine in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my car. She wasn't alone. A man in a suit stood behind her, holding a camera. "Mrs. Thompson," Doris said as I got out of the car, "I wanted to see how you were settling into your new home." There was nothing kind in her voice. This was a performance. "What do you want?" I was too tired for politeness. "I wanted to check on my son's children." She said it loud enough for the man with the camera to hear. "For the record, to make sure they're being properly cared for." The man started taking pictures. Of the cottage with its missing roof. Of my beat-up car. Of me, exhausted and desperate, holding my sick son. "Stop," I said. "Stop taking pictures of my children. I have every right to document the living conditions of Benjamin's children," Doris said smoothly. "Especially when those conditions appear to be unsuitable." Ice flooded my veins. "What are you doing?" "I'm gathering evidence for a custody petition." She smiled, and it was the cruelest thing I'd ever seen. "You can't provide for these children, Martha. You have no home, no income, no means of support. They're living in a structure that should be condemned. They're malnourished. The boy is clearly ill. Because you made sure no one would help me." My voice rose. "You froze my bank account. You told everyone in town not to give me credit. You had my insurance canceled." "I did no such thing," Doris said calmly. "I simply informed my business associates that I wouldn't continue relationships with anyone who enabled your poor decisions. What they chose to do with that information was entirely up to them. You're trying to take my children. I'm trying to save them." She stepped closer, and her voice dropped low enough that the camera wouldn't pick it up. "You can fight this if you want, but you have no money for a lawyer, no character witnesses, no way to prove you can provide adequate care. The judge in this county plays golf with my late husband's brother. How do you think that custody hearing will go?" I couldn't breathe. She was going to take Leah and Blake. She was going to use my poverty against me, and she was going to win. "Or," Doris continued, "you could make this easy. Sign over custody voluntarily. I'll make sure the children are well cared for. Private schools. The best medical care. Everything you can't give them. They'll be raised to think their mother abandoned them," I whispered. "Better than being raised in this." She gestured at the cottage with disgust. "At least they'll have a chance at a decent life. You love them, don't you? Then do what's best for them." She left the papers on the hood of my car. Custody termination forms, already filled out, just waiting for my signature. "You have 1 week to decide," Doris said. "After that, I file with the court. And Martha, if we go to court, I'll make sure those children never see you again. Not even supervised visits. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother lets her children starve." She got in her Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing in the dark with those papers and the certain knowledge that I'd lost. I put Blake to bed in our makeshift tent area. I gave him his medicine. I held Leah while she cried because she was still hungry and I had nothing to give her. And then, when my children were finally asleep, I sat by the fireplace and stared at those custody papers. Maybe Doris was right. Maybe my children would be better off without me. They'd have food, warmth, medical care. They'd grow up in that mansion with everything I couldn't provide. They'd also grow up being told their mother was worthless. That love didn't matter. That money was everything. I couldn't sign those papers. But I couldn't see a way out either. The cottage was freezing. I needed to build a fire, but we were almost out of wood. I'd have to gather more in the morning. I went to the fireplace and started clearing out the ash from previous fires. The fireplace was old, built with rough bricks that had probably been there since the cottage was constructed decades ago. One of the bricks was loose. I pulled at it absently, not really thinking, just needing something to do with my hands while my world fell apart. The brick came out easily. Too easily. Behind it was a hollow space. And inside that space was an envelope. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The envelope was old, yellowed with age, sealed with wax that had cracked and broken. There was writing on the front in faded ink. "To whoever finds this, the truth is hidden where no man would look." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in small, precise handwriting. My name is Samuel Pierce, and I built this cottage in 1943. I also built the Thompson Mansion, along with every other structure on this estate. I'm writing this because I know I won't live much longer, and there are things that need to be said. Richard Thompson Sr., the grandfather of the current Richard Thompson, didn't pay me for my work. He promised payment when the mansion was complete. Instead, when I asked for my money, he had me arrested for trespassing. Said I was trying to extort him. The judge believed him because Richard Thompson was white and I was black, and this was Georgia in 1943. I lost everything. My business, my reputation, my land, the land. That's what this is really about. Before Richard Thompson bought the estate property, it belonged to my family. My grandfather purchased 200 acres in 1889, back when freed slaves could still own property in this county. We farmed that land for 3 generations. When I needed money for my construction business, Richard Thompson offered to buy 20 acres. He paid fair market value. I thought he was being generous. I was wrong. He used that 20-acre purchase to claim the entire property through a surveying fraud. He had his surveyor draw the property lines to include all 200 acres. When I protested, he produced paperwork showing I'd agreed to the sale. The signature was forged, but again, black man's word against a white man's word in 1943. I couldn't fight him. Not legally. So I hid the truth. Inside the Thompson Mansion, in the foundation, I sealed documents proving the land fraud. But I also hid something else. Something Richard Thompson never knew about. My grandfather didn't trust banks. When he bought that land, he paid in gold. And when he died, that gold passed to my father, then to me. 30 gold bars, each worth a fortune even then. When Richard Thompson stole my land, I made sure he didn't get everything. I hid the gold where he'd never find it. In the cottage I built for his groundskeeper. In the ceiling beams. I hid it above where no man would look. In the beams of heaven. If you're reading this, you've found the cottage. Maybe you need what's hidden there more than I do. Take it. Use it. And if you can, make sure the truth about the Thompson family comes to light. They built their fortune on stolen land and stolen labor. They deserve to lose it all. Samuel Pierce. December 1943 inch. I read the letter 3 times. Then I looked up at the sagging, ruined ceiling of the cottage. My hands were shaking as I stood up. I dragged the only chair we had into the center of the room and climbed onto it. The ceiling was just within reach. I pressed my hand against one of the boards. It was soft with rot, crumbling at my touch. I pushed harder. The board gave way, and gold bars rained down on me like judgment from heaven. I stood in that cottage surrounded by gold bars, Samuel Pierce's letter clutched in my hand, and I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I laughed. Not a happy laugh. A broken, desperate, almost hysterical laugh that bordered on crying. Because of course the cottage Doris Thompson had given me as an insult contained the actual Thompson fortune. Of course the thing they'd thrown away as garbage was the most valuable thing on the entire estate. The irony was so perfect it hurt. I counted the gold bars by flashlight. 30 bars, exactly like Samuel Pierce had written. Each one stamped with dates from the 1890s and early 1900s. Each one heavy enough that I could barely lift it. I had no idea what they were worth. Thousands. Hundreds of thousands. More. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I finally had options. But I had to be smart. If Doris found out about this gold, she'd find a way to take it. She'd claim it was part of the estate, that it belonged on Thompson property, that I had no right to it. She'd tie me up in legal battles for years while my children starved. No, I had to move carefully, invisibly. I waited until dawn, then loaded 3 gold bars into a duffel bag and hid them under a blanket in my trunk. I left Leah and Blake sleeping, drove 2 hours to Atlanta, and found the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. The pawn shop was in a part of the city where security cameras were suggestions and cash was king. The man behind the counter was old Lebanese maybe, with sharp eyes that saw everything. "I need to sell gold," I said. He didn't even blink. "Let me see it." I put 1 bar on the counter. He picked it up, examined it, tested it with acid, weighed it. "Where'd you get this?" Inheritance. Uh-huh. He looked at me for a long moment. This is real. Pre-1900s. Collector value on top of gold value. I can give you $48,000 for this one bar. My knees almost gave out. $48,000. For one bar. I had 30 bars. I'll take it, I said. Cash. Cash. He raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of cash to carry around. I know what I'm doing. He counted out the money slowly. $100 bills in neat stacks. When he was done, I had a duffel bag with $48,000 in it. You got more of these? He asked. Maybe. Come back anytime. I'll always buy them. But sweetheart, be careful who you tell about this. People kill for less. I drove back to the cottage with that money hidden under the seat, my heart pounding the entire way. I'd never had this much money in my life. My entire nursing salary for a year hadn't been this much. And I had 29 more bars. But money alone wouldn't save me from Doris's custody petition. I needed a plan. I needed to think like they did, cold, calculating, ruthless. I needed to become someone they'd never see coming. First, I took care of immediate needs. I drove to the city and bought groceries from a store where no one knew me. I bought a space heater for the cottage. I bought warm clothes for Leah and Blake. I bought medicine, vitamins, everything we'd been doing without. I bought a laptop computer and a burner phone with cash. No paper trail. Then I started researching. Everything I could find about the Thompson family. Their business holdings. Their investments. Their vulnerabilities. Thompson Manufacturing was Vivian's now, but it was struggling. The company made industrial parts for agricultural equipment. Their main customer was a company called Heartland Agriculture, which bought 60% of Thompson Manufacturing's output. Heartland Agriculture was publicly traded. I could see their stock price, their quarterly reports, everything. I kept digging. Doris owned the estate outright, but maintaining it cost money. Property taxes alone were probably crushing. The trust fund Richard had left her was substantial, but not infinite. And there were debts. Richard Thompson had died with debts. Medical bills from a long illness. Business loans. Credit lines. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to create pressure. They weren't as untouchable as they pretended to be. Over the next week, I sold 3 more gold bars. Different pawn shops, different parts of the city, always cash. I now had nearly $200,000 hidden in the cottage. I also hired a private investigator, a black woman named Janet Foster who specialized in estate fraud and land disputes. I told her everything. Samuel Pierce's letter, the stolen land, the forged documents. This is explosive, Janet said when I met her in a coffee shop in Atlanta. If you can prove the Thompson estate was built on stolen land, you could bring the whole family down. Can I prove it? Maybe. Pierce mentioned he sealed documents in the mansion's foundation. If we could get access. I can't get anywhere near that mansion. Doris would call the police. Then we build the case from public records. Property transfers, surveys, court cases. It'll take time, but if Pierce was telling the truth, there'll be evidence. How much time? Months. Maybe a year. I didn't have a year. I had less than a week before Doris filed her custody petition. There's something else, Janet said carefully. Your husband's death. You said the police ruled it an accident, but you don't believe it was. Benjamin didn't drink. The toxicology report was wrong. Or it was accurate, but the alcohol was given to him without his knowledge. The words hung in the air between us. You think they murdered him, I said quietly. I think your husband went to visit his father for the first time in 6 years. I think he probably expected some kind of reconciliation. Maybe Richard offered him a drink. Maybe Richard wanted to make sure Benjamin didn't contest the will later. Janet pulled out a file. Richard Thompson died November 3rd. Heart attack, according to his death certificate. He changed his will October 28th, a few days after your husband died. That's a very convenient timeline. Can you prove any of this? Not without an exhumation and a second autopsy on your husband. And that requires a court order, which requires evidence of foul play, which we don't have. It was a circle with no exit. What do? I asked. You survive, Janet said. You fight the custody case. And you let me dig into the Thompson family history. If there's dirt to find, I'll find it. I paid her a retainer in cash, and left feeling like I'd at least taken one step forward. But the custody hearing was in 5 days, and I still had no way to prove I could take care of my children. That's when I realized something. I didn't need to prove I could take care of them in the cottage. I needed to prove I could take care of them somewhere else. I spent 2 days looking at apartments in the city. Nothing fancy, but clean, warm, with working electricity and running water. I found a 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood for $1,200 a month. I signed a 6-month lease and paid in cash. The landlord didn't ask questions. I furnished it simply. Beds for the kids, a couch, a table, everything from thrift stores and discount furniture outlets, but it was clean and safe and warm. I enrolled Leah in kindergarten at the local elementary school. I took Blake to a pediatrician for a full checkup. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and deposited $10,000. I created the appearance of stability, of a mother who had her life together. On paper, I was still a broke widow living in a condemned cottage. But I had an exit strategy now. If the custody hearing went badly, I could take my children and disappear into the city. Doris would never find us. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning at 10 o'clock. I dressed in the only professional outfit I owned, the same black dress I'd worn to Benjamin's funeral and the will reading. I did my hair carefully. I practiced what I'd say. I showed up 30 minutes early. Doris was already there, looking perfect in a navy suit, with a lawyer who probably cost $5,000 a day. I was representing myself. I couldn't afford a lawyer, and legal aid had told me they were too backlogged to take my case. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Patricia Caldwell. She looked tired and overworked, like she'd seen every kind of family tragedy and stopped being surprised years ago. "This is a preliminary hearing for emergency custody," Judge Caldwell said. "Mrs. Doris Thompson has petitioned for temporary custody of Leah Thompson, age 5, and Blake Thompson, age 2, on the grounds that their mother is unable to provide adequate care. Mrs. Martha Thompson, do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have legal representation?" "No, Your Honor. I'm representing myself." The judge looked at Doris's expensive lawyer and sighed. "Proceed." Doris's lawyer stood. His name was Marcus Webb, and he moved like a shark. "Your Honor, we have documented evidence that Mrs. Martha Thompson is currently residing in a structure that is unsafe for human habitation, let alone for 2 young children." He placed photographs on the judge's desk. The photos Doris's man had taken outside the cottage. The roof is partially collapsed. There is no running water, no electricity, no heat source besides a fireplace. The children are living in conditions that constitute neglect. "Mrs. Thompson?" Judge Caldwell looked at me. "Is this accurate?" "That was accurate 2 weeks ago, Your Honor. I've since moved to an apartment in the city. The children are enrolled in school and have regular pediatric care." I handed her the lease agreement, the school enrollment papers, Blake's recent medical records. The judge examined them. "This lease was signed 4 days ago." "Yes, Your Honor. As soon as I was able to secure housing." "And how are you paying for this apartment?" "According to the petition, you have no income and no savings." This was the moment. I could tell the truth about the gold and lose everything. Or I could lie. "I received a settlement from my husband's life insurance policy," I said. "It was delayed due to the investigation into his death, but it was finalized last week." It wasn't true. Benjamin's life insurance had paid out weeks ago and barely covered the funeral. But there was no way for them to prove otherwise without subpoenaing every insurance company in the state. Marcus Webb smelled blood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson has provided no documentation of this supposed insurance settlement. We request time to verify her claims." "I can provide documentation," I said. "But it's personal financial information. I wasn't aware I'd need to bring it today." "This is a preliminary hearing," Judge Caldwell said. "But Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to order you to provide proof of income and financial stability within 2 weeks. Mr. Webb, I'm denying the emergency custody petition. The children will remain with their mother pending further review." Doris made a sound that might have been a gasp of outrage. "However," the judge continued, "I'm ordering supervised home visits by Child Protective Services. If those visits reveal any concerns about the children's welfare, We'll revisit this matter immediately. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss either. I'd bought myself time. As I left the courtroom, Doris caught up with me in the hallway. You think you've won something? Her voice was low and venomous. This isn't over. I will prove you're an unfit mother. I will take those children from you. And when I do, you'll never see them again. Maybe, I said. Or maybe you should ask yourself why you want them so badly. You didn't care about them when Benjamin was alive. You never even met them. This isn't about protecting them. This is about hurting me. You're right, Doris said, and her honesty was more chilling than her threats. This is about making sure you understand what happens when people like you try to attach themselves to families like mine. Benjamin forgot his place. You need to learn yours. She walked away, leaving me shaking with rage and fear and determination. That night, I sat in the cottage with Samuel Pierce's letter and made a decision. Surviving wasn't enough anymore. Protecting my children wasn't enough. I was going to do what Samuel Pierce never could. I was going to destroy the Thompson family. Not with violence. Not with public confrontation. With something much more devastating. I was going to take everything they valued, piece by piece, until they were left with nothing but the knowledge that they'd been beaten by the woman they'd tried to bury. I started with Thompson Manufacturing. I researched everything about the company. Their suppliers, their customers, their contracts, their weaknesses. And I found something interesting. Heartland Agriculture, their biggest customer, was struggling. Their stock was down 40% over the last year. They were desperate for capital. And their CEO was about to retire. I made a call. Heartland Agriculture, how may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with someone about investment opportunities, I said. It took 3 days and 5 phone calls before I got a meeting with Heartland's CFO. I told him I represented a group of investors interested in taking a significant position in the company. I asked detailed questions about their supply chain, their margins, their future prospects. And I asked about Thompson Manufacturing. They're a decent supplier, the CFO said. But honestly, they're overpriced and their quality control has been slipping. We've been looking at alternatives. What would it take to switch suppliers? Someone would have to make it worth our while. Buy out our current contract with Thompson, cover the transition costs, guarantee pricing for 2 years. How much? $3 million, maybe 4. I didn't have $3 million. But I had gold bars worth at least $1 million, and I had an idea. Over the next 2 weeks, I sold 10 more gold bars. Different cities, different dealers, always cash. I now had nearly $500,000. I also opened an account with an investment firm under the name of a shell company, Warren Holdings LLC. The lawyer who set it up for me didn't ask where the money came from. He just made sure the ownership was buried behind enough layers that no one could trace it back to me. I invested $200,000 in Heartland Agriculture stock. Then I called the CFO again. I'm prepared to make an offer, I said. My investors will cover the costs of switching suppliers from Thompson Manufacturing. In exchange, we want assurances about your company's direction and a seat on the board. It took a month of negotiations. A month during which CPS visited my apartment twice and found nothing wrong. A month during which Doris kept calling the school, trying to find some reason to claim I was neglecting my children. A month during which I lived 2 lives. The struggling widow in her small apartment, and the invisible investor dismantling the Thompson empire. The deal closed on a Friday in January. Heartland Agriculture announced they were switching suppliers. Thompson Manufacturing stock dropped 15% in a single day. Vivian called an emergency board meeting. I know because Janet was monitoring everything. They're panicking, Janet told me over the phone. Thompson Manufacturing just lost 60% of their revenue. They'll have to lay off workers, probably close a plant. Vivian's scrambling to find new customers, but it's not going to be enough. Good, I said. Martha, this is just the beginning. Are you sure you want to keep going? Because once you start this kind of campaign, there's no going back. I thought about Blake crying from hunger, about Leah's empty eyes, about Doris threatening to take my children, about Benjamin dying under suspicious circumstances and no one caring enough to investigate. I'm sure, I said. What's next? The estate taxes. Doris is already stretched thin maintaining that property. If something were to happen that increased her tax burden or reduced her cash flow. Like what? Like if the historical designation of the mansion were challenged. Historical properties get tax breaks. But if the designation was based on fraudulent history. I smiled. Samuel Pierce built that mansion, not the Thompson family. If we can prove the property records were falsified, then the historical designation is void, and Doris gets hit with back taxes plus penalties. How long will that take? I'm already filing the challenge. It'll take months to process, but the tax assessor's office doesn't move fast. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. I hung up and looked at the remaining gold bars hidden in the cottage. I still had 15 bars left. Enough to keep going. Enough to finish this. But Doris wasn't stupid. She'd eventually realize someone was targeting her family. She'd start looking for enemies. And I needed to make sure she never looked at me. So I did something I'd learned from watching the Thompson family operate. I made myself invisible. I showed up at the apartment for CPS visits. I worked part-time at a coffee shop in the city to establish legitimate income. I kept my head down and played the role of the grateful widow who was just trying to survive. And in the shadows, Warren Holdings LLC continued to grow. I bought a struggling logistics company that supplied Thompson Manufacturing with raw materials. I raised their prices by 30%. Vivian had no choice but to pay or shut down production. I bought debt from small businesses the Thompson family had contracts with. Then I called in those debts, forcing the businesses to break their contracts with Thompson Manufacturing or face bankruptcy. I did everything they'd done to me, but I did it legally, ruthlessly, invisibly. By March, Thompson Manufacturing was hemorrhaging money. Vivian was desperate to sell, but no one wanted to buy a company that was actively failing. Except Warren Holdings LLC. I made an offer through my lawyer. $5 million for Thompson Manufacturing and all its assets. It was a lowball offer, an insult. But Vivian had no other options. She accepted. The day the sale closed, I sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite happiness, but something close to it. A sense that maybe justice was possible after all. I owned the company Benjamin's family had built over 3 generations. And they had no idea I was the one who'd bought it. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because Doris still had the mansion. She still had her pride. She still had the ability to hurt me. And I'd learned something from Samuel Pierce's letter. The mansion's foundation held more than just structural support. It held the truth. It held evidence of the original crime that built the Thompson fortune. I needed to get inside that mansion. I needed to find those documents. And I had an idea how to do it. The mansion needed repairs. I knew this because Janet had been monitoring every permit application, every contractor bid, every expense report related to the Thompson estate. The historical designation required Doris to maintain the property to specific standards, and the 60-year-old plumbing system was failing. She'd put out requests for bids from every licensed plumber and contractor in 3 counties. Most of them had turned her down. Word travels fast in small towns, and people were starting to notice that working for the Thompsons meant delayed payments and constant complaints. Only one company had submitted a bid, a small outfit called Pierce & Sons Restoration. Pierce & Sons didn't exist 3 weeks ago. I'd created it with $10,000 in startup capital, hired 2 experienced contractors who didn't ask questions about the owner, and made sure their bid was exactly what Doris wanted: cheap, fast, and professional looking. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Samuel Pierce would have appreciated it. On a Tuesday morning in late March, I watched from my car as the Pierce & Sons van pulled up to the mansion. I'd sent my 2 contractors alone. I couldn't risk Doris recognizing me. Not yet. But I'd given them very specific instructions about where to look while they worked. The job took 3 days. During that time, my contractors photographed everything: walls, floors, architectural details. They measured the foundation. They mapped the basement. And on the 3rd day, while replacing pipes in the basement's south corner, they found exactly what Samuel Pierce had described: a sealed compartment in the foundation wall, behind a brick that had been mortared differently from the others. Inside were documents wrapped in oilcloth and preserved perfectly. Property deeds. survey maps, court records, and a confession written in Richard Thompson Sr.'s own handwriting, detailing how he'd forged Samuel Pierce's signature and bribed the county surveyor to steal 200 acres of land. My contractors didn't open the documents. They just photographed the hiding place, noted its location, and sealed it back up. Then they finished the plumbing job and submitted their invoice. Doris paid them without question. She was too distracted by other problems. Thompson Manufacturing was failing under new ownership. The new management, my management, though she didn't know it, had immediately fired half the workforce and was liquidating assets. The Thompson name was being removed from the business entirely. Vivian was devastated. She'd called Doris crying, according to Janet's sources. The company their family had built over 3 generations was being gutted by strangers. But that wasn't even the worst of Doris's problems. The tax assessor's office had completed their review of the mansion's historical designation. Based on evidence provided by concerned citizens, Janet had filed the challenge anonymously. They determined that the designation was granted under fraudulent pretenses. The property's historical significance was based on it being built by the Thompson family in 1895. But it hadn't been built by the Thompson family. It had been built by Samuel Pierce, a black contractor whose name had been deliberately erased from the records. The historical designation was revoked. The tax breaks disappeared, and Doris was suddenly facing a tax bill for $80,000 in back taxes plus penalties, due in 60 days. I watched from the shadows as her world began to crumble. But I underestimated something. I underestimated how dangerous a Thompson becomes when they're cornered. The call came on a Thursday evening. I was making dinner for Leah and Blake when my burner phone rang. Only 3 people had that number: my contractors, my lawyer, and Janet. "Martha, we have a problem." Janet's voice was tight with tension. "Doris hired a private investigator. A good one. He's been digging into Warren Holdings LLC. My stomach dropped. "How deep?" "Deep enough to trace some of the shell companies back to accounts you've touched. He hasn't connected it to you yet, but he's close. And Martha, there's something else. He's also investigating your husband's death." "Why?" "I don't know. But he requested the police file, the toxicology reports, everything. He interviewed the responding officers. He went to the accident site. None of this made sense. Why would Doris hire someone to investigate Benjamin's death? She knows what happened. Unless, the realization hit me like ice water. Unless she's trying to find evidence that I killed him," I said slowly. "If she can prove I had something to do with Benjamin's death, she gets the children automatically. I'd go to prison for murder." "Exactly. And Martha, if this investigator is good enough to trace your business dealings, he's good enough to manufacture evidence. You need to be very careful." I hung up and sat down hard on the couch. I'd been so focused on destroying the Thompsons financially that I hadn't considered they'd fight back, that they'd try to destroy me the same way. The next morning, 2 police detectives showed up at my apartment. "Mrs. Thompson? I'm Detective Raymond Walsh. This is Detective Sarah Chin. We need to ask you some questions about your husband's death." Leah was at school. Blake was at my neighbor's apartment for the morning. Thank God the children weren't here to see this. I already talked to the police. Months ago. The case was closed. "New evidence has come to light," Detective Walsh said. He was middle-aged, with tired eyes and the slow, methodical manner of someone who'd investigated thousands of cases. "May we come in?" I let them in because refusing would look suspicious. They sat on my couch and pulled out notebooks. "Mrs. Thompson, where were you on the evening of October 25th, the night your husband died?" "At home with my children." "Can anyone verify that?" "My children were 5 and 2. They can't verify anything." "Did you speak to anyone that evening? Make any phone calls?" "No. I was waiting for Benjamin to come home." Detective Chun leaned forward. She was younger, sharper, less patient than her partner. "Mrs. Thompson, we've been reviewing your husband's phone records. He made 3 calls that evening. 1 to you at 7:15, 1 to his mother at 7:45, and 1 to an unknown number at 8:03. I didn't know about the other calls. The call to you lasted 6 minutes. What did you discuss?" "He said dinner with his father was going well. He said he might be late. He said he loved me." Did he sound intoxicated? No. He sounded happy. And yet his blood alcohol content 2 hours later was 0.16. How do you explain that? I can't explain it. Benjamin didn't drink. People say that a lot about people who drink secretly, Detective Walsh said quietly. Maybe your husband was under stress. Money problems, maybe. New baby. Reconnecting with a family that had rejected him. That's a lot of pressure. We didn't have money problems. Really? Because according to your bank records, you were 3 months behind on rent. You had $17 in your checking account when your husband died. That sounds like money problems to me. We were managing. Were you angry at your husband's family? Detective Chin asked. For cutting him off? For treating you badly? Of course I was angry. But I didn't kill my husband. I loved him. Love and anger can coexist, Mrs. Thompson, Walsh said. And sometimes people do things they don't plan. Maybe you had an argument that night. Maybe things got out of hand. Maybe you gave him something to help him relax, not realizing how much alcohol he'd already had. I wasn't even there. He died 40 miles away. But you knew where he was going. You knew what route he'd take home. And you had access to his medication. What medication? Chin pulled out a file. Your husband was prescribed Ambien for insomnia 3 months before his death. The prescription was in your name because he didn't have insurance. If someone crushed those pills and put them in alcohol, the combination would be lethal. Especially if the person then got behind the wheel. My hands were shaking. You think I drugged my husband and sent him driving into a ravine? We think it's a possibility worth investigating, Walsh said. Especially given what's happened since his death. What does that mean? You inherit the cottage. You discover it's worth more than anyone realized. You come into money from somewhere. Enough money to hire lawyers, start a business, buy property. That's quite a turnaround for a woman who was supposedly destitute. They knew. Somehow they knew about the gold, about Warren Holdings, about everything. I think you should leave, I said. If you want to ask me anything else, you can talk to my lawyer. We're just trying to understand what happened, Mrs. Thompson, Walsh said, standing slowly. But here's something to think about. If new evidence surfaces that suggests your husband's death wasn't an accident, the case gets reopened. And if that happens, those children you're fighting so hard to keep, they go to their grandmother while you're under investigation. They left, leaving their cards on my coffee table. I called Janet immediately. They came to my apartment. They know about the money. They think I killed Benjamin. Doris is smart, Janet said. She can't prove you're behind Warren Holdings, but she can make the police suspicious enough to investigate. And once you're under investigation for murder, you lose the kids automatically, even if you're never charged. What do I do? You need evidence that Benjamin was murdered. Real evidence, not speculation. How? Exhumation. Second autopsy. We test for substances that weren't tested for the first time. Ambien, sedatives, anything that might have been given to him without his knowledge. That requires a court order, which requires proof that the original investigation was inadequate. Martha, I've been digging into the responding officers. The lead investigator on Benjamin's accident was a man named Thomas Garrett. He retired 2 months after your husband died. Very suddenly, very quietly. And he bought a boat, a 40-foot boat that cost $60,000. You think the Thompsons paid him to close the case quickly. I think it's suspicious enough to raise questions. If we can prove the original investigation was compromised, we can get the exhumation order. How long will that take? Weeks. Maybe months. I didn't have months. The detectives had made that clear. Doris was moving fast now, and she was using the law as a weapon just like I was. That night, I sat in the cottage. I still kept it, still visited it when I needed to think, and stared at Samuel Pierce's letter. He'd hidden his truth in the foundation of the mansion. Evidence that should have destroyed the Thompsons decades ago, but was buried and forgotten. I couldn't let the same thing happen to Benjamin's truth. I needed to move faster. Strike harder. Take everything from them before they could take my children from me. But I was tired. So tired. I'd spent months being two people. The struggling widow and the invisible destroyer. I'd spent every moment calculating, planning, hiding. I'd turned myself into the kind of person who could bankrupt a company and ruin lives without losing sleep. I'd become what I needed to become. But the cost was starting to show. Blake had started having nightmares. Leah asked me why I was always on the phone, always working, always somewhere else even when I was standing right next to her. I was winning the war against the Thompsons, but I was losing pieces of myself in the process. And the worst part, I didn't know if I could stop. Because the moment I stopped, the moment I let my guard down, Doris would strike. She'd take my children. She'd destroy what was left of my life. So I had to keep going. I had to finish this, even if it destroyed me too. The custody hearing was scheduled for April 15th, emergency session. The detective's visit had given Doris exactly what she needed: reasonable doubt about my fitness as a mother. I sat in my lawyer's office 3 days before the hearing, listening to him explain why I was going to lose. His name was David Park, and he'd been honest with me from the beginning. I'd hired him with gold bar money, but even the best lawyer couldn't fix what was broken. The murder investigation changes everything, David said. He was young, ambitious, but realistic. Even without charges, the investigation itself is enough for Judge Caldwell to remove the children from your care temporarily. She has to err on the side of protecting them. There is no murder investigation. Not officially. The detectives were fishing. But Doris will make sure the judge knows they came to question you. She'll paint you as dangerous. And Martha, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I didn't kill my husband. I believe you. But did you come into money illegally? Because if the source of your income can't be explained, if Warren Holdings is connected to you in any way that looks like fraud or money laundering, you'll lose the children and possibly face criminal charges. I couldn't tell him about the gold. Couldn't explain that I'd found a fortune hidden in a cottage ceiling. It sounded insane. And if Doris found out about the gold, she'd claim it belonged to the estate. She'd tie me up in court for years while my children grew up calling her mother. The money is legal, I said. It was technically true. The gold had been hidden by Samuel Pierce, left for whoever found it. I'd sold it legally. Paid taxes on it. Then we need documentation, bank statements, bills of sale, a paper trail that proves every dollar. That could expose things I don't want exposed. Then we're going to lose. I left his office feeling like the walls were closing in. I'd been so focused on destroying the Thompsons that I'd left myself vulnerable. I'd built my revenge on a foundation of secrets, and now those secrets were about to collapse under scrutiny. That night, CPS made an unannounced visit to my apartment. The social worker was a tired woman in her 40s named Carol Simmons. She'd been kind during previous visits, but this time her face was all business. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to inspect the apartment and speak with the children." Of course. I let her in, my heart racing. She walked through every room, making notes. Checked the refrigerator, the bedrooms, the bathroom. Everything was clean, stocked, exactly what it should be. Then she sat down with Leah while I waited in the kitchen. I couldn't hear everything they said, but I heard enough. "Does your mommy ever leave you alone?" Carol asked. "Sometimes," Leah said. "My 5-year-old, too honest for her own good. When she has to work." "Where does she work?" "I don't know. She's always on the phone." My stomach dropped. To a social worker, that sounded like neglect. Like I was leaving my children unsupervised while I conducted shady business. Carol spoke with Blake next, though at 2 years old, he couldn't tell her much. But he cried when she tried to take him to another room without me. He clung to my leg and wouldn't let go. "He's been clingy lately," I explained. "Since his father died. Or since the police came to question you," Carol said quietly. She knew. Of course she knew. Doris had made sure everyone knew. Carol finished her inspection and sat down with me at the kitchen table. "Martha, I'm going to be direct with you. I think you love your children. I think you're trying your best. But I also think you're in over your head. The police investigation, the financial irregularities, the fact that you're working at a coffee shop part-time, but somehow affording a nice apartment and private school. It doesn't add up. I have savings." "From where?" "Your husband didn't have life insurance that paid out more than funeral expenses. You were broke 3 months ago, and now you're not. People notice things like that. Are you recommending removal?" My voice barely worked. Carol was quiet for a long moment. Not yet, but at the hearing, I'm going to have to testify honestly about my concerns. Judge Caldwell will make the final decision, but Martha? It's not looking good. She left, and I sat in my empty apartment. The children were having a sleepover at my neighbor's. Thank God they weren't here for this. And felt everything I'd built start to crumble. I'd taken Thompson Manufacturing. I'd cost them hundreds of thousands in legal fees and tax penalties. I'd damaged their reputation and their legacy. But I was still going to lose my children. Because in the end, the Thompsons had something I didn't have: legitimacy. They had lawyers and investigators and judges who played golf with their family. They had respectability that came from generations of stolen wealth, looking like earned success. And I had secrets that would destroy me if they came to light. I called Janet at midnight. I need everything you have on Benjamin's death. Every piece of evidence that suggests he was murdered. I need it before the custody hearing. Martha, I don't have enough. The boat purchase is suspicious, but it's not proof. We need the exhumation we need. I don't have time. In 3 days, Judge Caldwell is going to take my children and give them to the woman who probably murdered their father. I need something I can use now. Janet was quiet. Then, there might be something. The unknown number Benjamin called the night he died. The third call. I've been trying to trace it, but it's a burner phone. Dead end. But someone has that phone. Someone knows who Benjamin called. Martha, even if we find out who he called, it doesn't prove anything. It proves he wasn't alone. It proves something happened that night that wasn't in the police report. I spent the next 2 days driving to every cell phone store within 50 miles of the Thompson estate. I showed them the number from Benjamin's phone records. Most couldn't help, privacy laws, they said. Company policy. But on the afternoon before the hearing, a young clerk at a discount phone store recognized the number. Yeah, I sold that phone. About 6 months ago. Prepaid, cash only. Guy said he wanted something his wife couldn't track. He pulled up the records. He bought 3 of them, actually. All cash. Same day. Do you remember what he looked like? Big guy. White. Late 50s maybe. Dressed nice. Expensive watch. Richard Thompson had bought burner phones 6 months before he died. 6 months before he'd invited Benjamin to the estate. It wasn't proof. But it was something. I called Janet. Richard Thompson bought burner phones. 3 of them. That's not the behavior of a man trying to reconnect with his son. That's the behavior of a man planning something. It's circumstantial. But Martha, if you bring this up at the hearing, Doris's lawyers will tear you apart. They'll say you're making wild accusations to deflect from your own issues. I know, but I have to try. The custody hearing started at 10 in the morning. Judge Caldwell looked even more tired than last time. Doris sat with her lawyer, perfectly composed, wearing pearls and certainty. I sat alone. David Park had laid out my options the night before. Fight and probably make things worse, or agree to temporary custody with supervised visitation. Give up my children for a few months while I sorted out my life, with the hope of getting them back later. I couldn't do it. Couldn't sign papers that said I was voluntarily giving my babies to the woman who'd tried to destroy me. Marcus Webb stood first. Your Honor, since our last hearing, disturbing information has come to light. Mrs. Thompson is currently under investigation for possible involvement in her husband's death. 2 homicide detectives questioned her 3 days ago. Judge Caldwell looked at me. Is this true? They asked me questions. I answered them. I haven't been charged with anything because I didn't do anything wrong. Nevertheless, Webb continued, the fact that law enforcement has concerns about Mrs. Thompson's potential involvement in a suspicious death raises serious questions about the safety of these children. The death wasn't suspicious until Doris Thompson made it suspicious, I said. I wasn't supposed to speak yet, but I couldn't stop myself. She hired a private investigator to manufacture evidence against me. Mrs. Thompson, you'll have your turn to speak, Judge Caldwell said. Webb called Carol Simmons to testify. She told the court about her concerns. The unexplained income, the long hours I worked despite claiming to be home with the children, Blake's clinginess, Leah's confusion about where her mother went during the day. She made me sound like a criminal and a neglectful mother in 5 minutes of careful, professional testimony. Then Webb called Detective Walsh. "Detective, can you describe your interaction with Mrs. Thompson?" We questioned her regarding inconsistencies in the investigation of her husband's death. Specifically, the source of alcohol in his system and his unusual behavior that evening. Did she have satisfactory answers? No, sir. She claims her husband didn't drink, but the toxicology report clearly shows. Your Honor, I need to speak. I stood up, and David grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back down. "Mrs. Thompson, sit down," Judge Caldwell said. "Benjamin was murdered." The words came out loud, clear, desperate. Richard Thompson invited him to the estate, gave him alcohol or drugs or something, and then sent him driving. He bought burner phones 6 months before he died. He changed his will 4 days after Benjamin's death. This wasn't a reconciliation. It was planned. The courtroom went silent. "Mrs. Thompson, do you have evidence of this?" Judge Caldwell asked. "I have proof Richard Thompson bought 3 burner phones for cash. I have proof Benjamin called an unknown number that night. I have proof the investigating officer retired suddenly and bought a boat he shouldn't have been able to afford. And I have proof that the Thompsons have been systematically trying to destroy me since Benjamin died." "Proof," Webb said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson is making wild accusations to deflect from her own criminal behavior. She has no evidence because none exists. What she does have is a history of erratic behavior, unexplained wealth, and a dead husband whose death she financially benefited from. I didn't benefit." My voice broke. "They took everything from me. They gave me a rotting cottage, and then tried to starve me out. They tried to take my children. They turned this whole town against me. Everything I've done has been to survive what they did to me." "And what exactly have you done, Mrs. Thompson?" Webb asked quietly. "Where did all that money come from?" I couldn't answer. Not without exposing everything. Judge Caldwell removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "I'm going to take a 30-minute recess. When we return, Mrs. Thompson, you're going to explain, with documentation, where your money came from. If you can't or won't do that, I'm removing the children from your custody pending a full investigation. Do you understand?" I understood. I had 30 minutes to decide whether to expose my secrets or lose my children. I walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway. Doris followed me. "You could have avoided all this," she said, "if you'd just left quietly. If you'd signed the custody papers months ago and disappeared. But you had to fight. You had to think you were worthy of being in our family. I was never trying to be in your family. I was trying to survive your family. Well, you failed." She smiled. "In 30 minutes, those children will be mine. And you'll be exactly what you've always been, nothing." She walked away, and I stood in that hallway with my whole world collapsing. I'd lost. Despite everything I'd done, every move I'd made, every piece of the Thompson empire I'd taken down, I was still going to lose what mattered most. My children. I stood in the courthouse bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a stranger, exhausted, hollow, desperate. I had 20 minutes left. My phone rang. "Janet." "Martha, I just heard what happened in the courtroom. Listen to me very carefully. You need to tell the truth. All of it. The gold, Samuel Pierce's letter, everything. If I do that, Doris will claim the gold belongs to the estate. She'll say it was hidden on Thompson property. So it's Thompson property. I'll lose everything I've built. You're going to lose your children if you don't. And Martha, think about this. If you present Samuel Pierce's letter and the documents from the Mansion Foundation, you prove the entire Thompson estate was built on stolen land. Doris won't have any claim to anything, including the gold Pierce hid." My hands were shaking. "The documents are still in the Mansion Foundation. I only have photographs. Photographs are evidence. And I have something else. I finally tracked down Thomas Garrett, the investigating officer who closed Benjamin's case. He's dying, Martha. Stage 4 cancer. And dying men sometimes want to clear their consciences. I spoke to him this morning. My heart stopped. What did he say? He said Richard Thompson paid him $20,000 to close the investigation quickly. Said Richard told him it was just an accident, that the family was grieving and didn't want it dragged out. Garrett took the money and didn't ask questions. He'll testify to that. He's writing out a sworn statement right now. That proves Benjamin was murdered. It proves the investigation was compromised. Combined with the burner phones, Benjamin's call records, and Richard's convenient death days later, it builds a case for exhumation and a real investigation. Will it be enough to stop the custody order? I don't know, but it's better than nothing. Martha, you have to go back in there and tell the truth. All of it. It's your only chance. I hung up and looked at my reflection again. For months, I'd been hiding, playing multiple roles, pretending to be weak while building strength in the shadows. But maybe that was the wrong strategy. Maybe the only way to beat the Thompsons was to drag everything into the light. Their crimes and mine. Their secrets and mine. Everything. I walked back into the courtroom with 2 minutes to spare. Judge Caldwell was already seated. Doris was smiling. Mrs. Thompson, the judge said, are you prepared to explain the source of your income? Yes, Your Honor. But first, I need to present new evidence regarding my husband's death. Marcus Webb stood immediately. Your Honor, this is a custody hearing, not a criminal investigation. Mrs. Thompson is stalling. I'm telling the truth, I said. And the truth is that Benjamin Thompson was murdered by his own father. And I can prove it. I handed the judge copies of everything Janet had sent me. The phone store records showing Richard Thompson's purchase of 3 burner phones. Benjamin's call records from that night. The photographs of the Mansion Foundation compartment. Samuel Pierce's letter. And Thomas Garrett's preliminary statement admitting he'd been bribed to close the investigation. Judge Caldwell read through the documents slowly. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers turning. This is a sworn statement from a police officer admitting to accepting a bribe, she finally said. Yes, Your Honor. Officer Garrett is dying and wanted to clear his conscience. He's prepared to testify that Richard Thompson paid him $20,000 to rule Benjamin's death an accident without proper investigation. Your Honor, this is ridiculous, Webb said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. A dying man making accusations against a dead man who can't defend himself. There's more, I said. The cottage I inherited wasn't worthless. Inside the ceiling, I found 30 gold bars hidden by a man named Samuel Pierce. The same Samuel Pierce who built the Thompson Mansion in 1943 and had his land stolen through fraud. I handed the judge copies of the historical documents from the foundation, the property deeds, the forged signatures, Richard Thompson Sr.'s confession. These documents prove that the entire Thompson estate, the mansion, the land, everything, was built on property stolen from Samuel Pierce's family. The Thompsons have been living on stolen land for 80 years. And when I found the gold Pierce had hidden, I used it to survive, to protect my children, to build a life after your family. I turned to look directly at Doris. Tried to destroy me. Doris's face had gone pale. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked shaken. You're saying you found gold in the cottage, Judge Caldwell said slowly. And you've been selling it? Yes, Your Honor. I've sold 15 bars so far. I paid taxes on the income. I have receipts from every transaction. The gold wasn't Thompson property. It was hidden by Samuel Pierce for whoever found it. He left a letter saying so. She's lying, Doris said, her voice sharp. That gold, if it exists, was on estate property. It belongs to the estate. The estate that was built on stolen land? I said, Samuel Pierce's land? If you want to claim ownership of the gold, Doris, you'll have to admit that your family stole the land it was hidden on. And if you admit that, you lose everything. The judge looked at Webb. Does your client wish to pursue a claim to this gold? Webb leaned over and whispered urgently with Doris. I could see the calculation in both their faces. If they claimed the gold, they'd have to explain how they owned the land, which would expose the fraud, which would destroy what was left of the Thompson empire. We'll address the property issues at a later date, Webb finally said. This hearing is about custody. No, I said. This hearing is about whether I'm fit to raise my children. And the truth is that I've done everything I could to protect them from a family that murdered their father. I found gold that didn't belong to the Thompsons, and I used it to survive. I started a business to rebuild our lives. I fought back against people who tried to starve us, humiliate us, and take everything from us. And yes, I did it in secret because I knew that the moment the Thompsons realized I had resources, they'd try to take those too. I turned to face the judge directly. I'm not a perfect mother. I've made mistakes. I've been so focused on surviving that I haven't always been present for my children. But I love them more than anything in this world. And I will not let them be raised by the family that murdered their father. Judge Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Detective Walsh, who'd been sitting in the back of the courtroom. Detective, in light of this new information, will your department be reopening the investigation into Benjamin Thompson's death? Walsh looked uncomfortable. We'll need to review the evidence, Your Honor. If Officer Garrett's statement is credible, then yes, we'll have to reconsider the original findings. And Mrs. Thompson is no longer a suspect? Based on this information, no. If Benjamin Thompson was deliberately given alcohol by his father, as these documents suggest, then Mrs. Thompson couldn't have been involved. She wasn't present at the estate that night. I watched Doris's face as the implications sank in. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was accusing her dead husband of murder. And if the investigation was reopened, if Benjamin's body was exhumed, if the truth came out, the Thompson name would be destroyed forever. Judge Caldwell closed the file in front of her. I'm going to order an independent investigation into the death of Benjamin Thompson. I'm also ordering that all documents related to the Pierce property claim be turned over to the county prosecutor's office for review. And as for the custody matter, she looked at me, then at Doris, then back at me. Mrs. Thompson, I'm not removing your children from your custody. However, I am ordering continued CPS supervision and mandatory counseling for both you and the children. You need to find a better balance between your work and your family. Your children need stability and presence, not just financial security. Relief flooded through me so intensely, I thought I might collapse. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet. If CPS reports any concerns over the next 6 months, we'll revisit this matter. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. As for you, Mrs. Thompson, Judge Caldwell turned to Doris. I suggest you retain a good criminal defense attorney. If the investigation determines that your husband was involved in your son's death, there may be questions about what you knew and when you knew it. Doris stood, her composure finally cracking. This is absurd. You're taking the word of a dead man and a dying man over. I'm following the evidence, Judge Caldwell said coldly. Something that should have been done 6 months ago. This hearing is adjourned. I walked out of that courtroom with my children still mine, with the truth finally starting to emerge, with everything I'd fought for intact. But I wasn't done. Not yet, because Doris still had the mansion. She still had her freedom. She still had the ability to hurt me. And I'd learned something in that courtroom. The truth was more powerful than secrets. Light was more dangerous than shadows. It was time to stop hiding. Time to finish what Samuel Pierce started 80 years ago. Time to take everything the Thompsons had built on stolen ground and burn it to the foundation. Outside the courthouse, Janet was waiting. You did it, she said. You kept the kids. For now. But this isn't over. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to use those documents to prove the entire Thompson estate is built on stolen land. We're going to expose every crime this family has committed for 3 generations. And we're going to make sure everyone knows that their fortune was built on the backs of people they destroyed. Janet smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I was hoping you'd say that, because I just got a call from the prosecutor's office. They want to see all the evidence we have on the property fraud. They're talking about criminal charges for whoever knowingly benefited from stolen property. Doris knew, I said. She had to know. You don't live on a massive estate for 40 years and not know where it came from. Proving knowledge is harder than proving the original crime. But if we can show she actively tried to cover it up, tried to intimidate you into silence, tried to take your children to hide the truth, then she goes down with the estate. Exactly. I looked back at the courthouse. Through the windows, I could see Doris standing with her lawyer, both of them looking panicked. For the first time in 6 months, I wasn't the one running scared. They were. The exhumation order came through 3 weeks later. Benjamin's body was removed from the ground on a gray morning in May, exactly 7 months after I'd buried him. I stood at a distance and watched, Leah and Blake at home with a babysitter, and I felt something break open inside me that I'd been keeping sealed shut. The second autopsy took 2 weeks. When the results came back, they confirmed what I'd known in my bones all along. Benjamin had been drugged with a massive dose of Rohypnol, a sedative that causes amnesia and blackouts. It had been mixed with alcohol and given to him in sufficient quantity that he wouldn't have been able to drive safely even if he'd tried. The original toxicology screen hadn't tested for Rohypnol because there was no reason to suspect it. But the most damning evidence was something else. Fibers found under Benjamin's fingernails that matched the carpet in Richard Thompson's study. Defensive wounds on his hands that suggested he'd tried to fight back. And ligature marks on his wrists that indicated he'd been restrained at some point before getting into his truck. Benjamin hadn't driven drunk. He'd been drugged, possibly restrained, and then placed in his truck and sent down that mountain road to die. It was murder. Premeditated, calculated murder. The prosecutor's office scheduled a press conference for June 1st. They were announcing the reopening of the case and pursuing charges related to Benjamin's death. Since Richard Thompson was dead, they couldn't charge him with murder. But conspiracy charges could still be filed against anyone who helped plan or cover up the crime. That meant Doris. That meant anyone else who knew. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But I had something planned for noon. I'd spent the last month working with Janet and a team of lawyers specializing in property restoration and historical injustice. We'd filed a lawsuit on behalf of Samuel Pierce's descendants. His great-granddaughter was still alive, living in Florida, and she'd been stunned to learn about her family's stolen land. The lawsuit claimed ownership of the entire Thompson estate based on the fraudulent property transfer of 1943. We had the original documents, the forged signatures, Richard Thompson Sr.'s confession, and testimony from 3 historical experts confirming the fraud. The case was airtight. The Thompsons had no defense. But I wanted more than a legal victory. I wanted everyone to know. I wanted the truth told publicly, loudly, permanently. So I organized an event. I rented the ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, the nicest hotel in the county, where the Thompson family had held their charity galas and anniversary parties for decades. I invited every business owner, every civic leader, every person of influence in the community. I told them I was announcing a major philanthropic initiative. Over 200 people showed up. Doris was there too. She'd been invited anonymously, told there would be an announcement about the Thompson estate's future. She came because she couldn't afford not to know what was being said about her family. I watched her walk into that ballroom in her designer suit, her head held high, pretending she wasn't facing criminal investigation and financial ruin. She saw me standing at the front of the room and froze. "Thank you all for coming," I said into the microphone. My voice was steady, strong. "My name is Martha Warren Thompson. Some of you know me as Benjamin Thompson's widow. Others know me as the woman who lived in the groundskeeper's cottage. Today, I'm here to tell you a story about justice, about truth, and about what happens when families build empires on stolen ground." The room went silent. In 1943, a black contractor named Samuel Pierce built the Thompson Mansion. He was never paid for his work. Instead, Richard Thompson Sr. had him arrested for extortion. But that wasn't the worst of what Richard Thompson did. I clicked a button, and the screen behind me lit up with an image of the original property deed. Samuel Pierce's name clearly visible as the owner of 200 acres. Samuel Pierce's family had owned this land since 1889. They'd farmed it for 3 generations. Richard Thompson convinced Pierce to sell him 20 acres. Then he used a fraudulent survey and forged documents to claim all 200 acres. Click. The forged deed appeared. Then the original survey. Then Richard Thompson Sr.'s handwritten confession that we'd found in the mansion foundation. Samuel Pierce lost everything. His land, his business, his reputation. He died in poverty in 1945, believing that justice was impossible for a black man in Georgia. I looked directly at Doris. Her face was white with rage and fear. But Samuel Pierce was smarter than the Thompsons realized. Before he died, he hid evidence of their crime in the foundation of the mansion he built. And he hid something else in the cottage he was later commissioned to build. He hid 30 gold bars, his family's entire fortune, in the ceiling. He left them there with a letter that said, "For whoever finds this, use it to make sure the truth comes to light." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I found that gold 6 months ago. I found it in the cottage that Doris Thompson gave me as an insult, as a way to humiliate me and drive me out of town. And I used that gold exactly as Samuel Pierce intended, to survive, to protect my children, and to bring the truth into the light. I clicked again. Benjamin's autopsy report appeared on the screen, with the critical findings highlighted. My husband Benjamin Thompson died 7 months ago. The Thompsons told everyone it was a drunk driving accident. They said Benjamin had a drinking problem. They used his death to paint me as a bad mother, as someone who'd married into their family for money. But Benjamin didn't die in an accident. The room was absolutely silent now. People were leaning forward, not wanting to miss a word. Benjamin was murdered. He was drugged with Rohypnol, restrained, and then placed in his truck and sent down a mountain road. The original investigation was closed quickly because Richard Thompson paid the investigating officer $20,000 to rule it an accident. Click. Thomas Garrett's sworn statement appeared. Richard Thompson invited his son to the estate under the pretense of reconciliation. But he'd changed his will days earlier to exclude Benjamin completely. He'd bought burner phones to coordinate the murder. And when Benjamin showed up that night, trusting his father, believing they could heal their broken relationship, Richard Thompson drugged him and killed him. I heard someone in the audience gasp. Several people were crying. Richard Thompson died of a convenient heart attack 3 days after murdering his son. But his wife Doris knew. She had to know. And instead of telling the truth, instead of letting her son's death be properly investigated, she did everything she could to destroy me. Click. Images appeared of the cottage in its ruined state, of my eviction notice, of CPS reports, of the custody petition. She froze my bank accounts. She told every business in town not to give me credit. She had my health insurance canceled so my 2-year-old son couldn't see a doctor when he had pneumonia. She tried to take my children by claiming I was an unfit mother because I was too poor to feed them. Poor because she'd made sure I couldn't access my own money or find work. I could see people in the audience looking at Doris now, their expressions changing from curiosity to disgust. But what she didn't know was that I'd found Samuel Pierce's gold, that I'd read his letter, that I understood exactly what kind of family the Thompsons really were. So I did what I had to do. I built a business. I bought back everything they'd stolen from me, and I gathered evidence of every crime they'd committed. Click. The property lawsuit documents appeared. As of this morning, a lawsuit has been filed on behalf of Samuel Pierce's descendants, claiming rightful ownership of the Thompson estate. The case is ironclad. The Thompsons have lived on stolen land for 80 years, built their fortune on stolen wealth, and destroyed anyone who threatened to expose the truth. Doris stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is slander," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't prove any of." "I can prove all of it," I said calmly. "Every document I've shown today is part of the public record. The property fraud, the confession, Benjamin's autopsy, Officer Garrett's statement. It's all been submitted to the prosecutor's office. In fact, there's a press conference scheduled for 2 hours from now where the district attorney will announce charges related to the cover-up of Benjamin's murder." The color drained from Doris's face completely. "You're done," I said quietly. "The mansion will be returned to Samuel Pierce's family. The business is already gone. I own Thompson Manufacturing, by the way. I bought it 6 months ago through a shell company. The historical designation is revoked. The tax liens are piling up, and the criminal investigation is just getting started." Doris looked around the room at all the people staring at her. The same people who'd attended her charity galas, who'd smiled and nodded and treated her like royalty because of her family name. "You've destroyed us," she whispered. "No," I said. "I've exposed you. You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided that stealing and lying and murdering were acceptable as long as you had enough money and the right skin color to get away with it." She turned and walked toward the exit. But I wasn't finished. "Doris." She stopped. "The cottage. The worthless piece of garbage you gave me to humiliate me. That cottage held the real Thompson fortune. All those years you lived in that mansion, looking down on everyone, believing you were better because of your family legacy. The actual wealth was rotting in a building you'd forgotten existed. You literally gave away everything of value and kept the empty shell. She made a sound that might have been a sob or a scream. And then she was gone, practically running from the ballroom. The room erupted in noise. People were talking, arguing, pulling out their phones to call friends and share what they'd just witnessed. Several reporters who'd been in the audience were already typing frantically, breaking the story before the official press conference. A black woman in her 60s approached me. She had kind eyes and Samuel Pierce's smile. "I'm Diana Pierce Robinson," she said. "Samuel Pierce was my great-grandfather. I never knew him, but my grandmother told me stories. She said he died heartbroken, believing that justice was impossible for our family." "Justice is possible," I said. "It just took 80 years. She hugged me and we both cried. Over the next week, everything fell apart for the Thompsons. The district attorney announced charges of conspiracy to commit murder against Vivian Thompson. They had evidence that she'd known about Richard's plan to kill Benjamin. Phone records showing multiple calls between Vivian and Richard in the days before Benjamin's death, and testimony from a former Thompson manufacturing employee who'd overheard Vivian telling someone that father is handling the Benjamin problem. Doris was charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy after the fact. She'd known her husband murdered Benjamin and had actively worked to cover it up. The property lawsuit moved forward quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, and the Thompsons had no defense. The court ruled that the entire estate would be returned to the Pierce family, along with damages for 80 years of stolen profits. Doris was given 30 days to vacate the mansion. I heard through Janet that she'd tried to sell furniture and artwork to pay for her legal defense, but most of it was purchased with money from Thompson Manufacturing, which I now owned. Technically, the furniture was company assets that had been improperly used for personal benefit. I reclaimed everything. On the day Doris moved out of the mansion, I was there. Not to gloat, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. I was there to bear witness. To see the moment when someone who'd treated me like garbage learned what it felt like to lose everything. She came out of that mansion with 2 suitcases and a taxi waiting. Everything else, every piece of furniture, every painting, every crystal chandelier stayed behind. She saw me standing by my car and stopped. "Are you satisfied?" she asked. Her voice was hollow. "Broken." "No," I said honestly, "because Benjamin is still dead. My children still grew up without their father, and nothing I do can change that. But I am satisfied that you finally understand what you did, that you know the price of cruelty." "I loved my son," she said, and for the first time she sounded human. "Fragile. I know you don't believe that, but I did. I just loved our family legacy more. I thought that was the same thing as loving him. It wasn't. I know that now." She looked back at the mansion. "I lived in that house for 40 years. Raised my children there. Hosted parties and celebrations and holidays. And now I'll be remembered as the woman who lived on stolen land and covered up murder. That's my legacy." "That's the legacy you chose," I said. "Every time you had a chance to do the right thing, you chose cruelty instead. You chose pride over truth. And now you have to live with that." She got into the taxi and left. I never saw her again. Diana Pierce Robinson moved into the mansion a month later. She turned it into a museum and educational center, focused on the history of land theft and racial injustice in the South. Samuel Pierce's story became the centerpiece of the exhibit. And the cottage? Diana wanted to give it to me outright, but I insisted on buying it properly. I paid fair market value for the cottage and the 3 acres it sat on. Then I renovated it completely. It's beautiful now, restored with care and respect for its history. My children and I live there, on land that represents everything I fought for. Survival, justice, truth. The last gold bars. I'd kept 5 of them, not for money but for what they represented. I donated to a scholarship fund in Samuel Pierce's name. Every year, 5 black students from the county receive full college scholarships funded by the wealth Samuel Pierce hid in that ceiling. It seemed like what he would have wanted. 2 years later, I stood in the garden of the cottage, my cottage now, watching Leah chase butterflies while Blake played with his toy trucks in the sandbox Benjamin had built before he died. I'd moved it from our old rental house, one of the few things I'd kept from that life. The cottage barely resembled the ruin the Thompsons had given me. The roof was new, the windows gleamed, and flowers bloomed in beds I'd planted myself. But I'd kept Samuel Pierce's fireplace intact, with a bronze plaque beside it that read, "In this place, Samuel Pierce hid the truth and the means to reveal it. May we always remember that justice delayed is not justice denied." My phone rang. "Janet, turn on the news," she said. "Channel 7. I pulled out my phone and found the live stream. A reporter stood outside a courthouse in Atlanta. In a stunning conclusion to the Thompson case, Vivian Thompson has been sentenced to 15 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. Her mother, Doris Thompson, received 8 years for her role in covering up the death of Benjamin Thompson. I turned it off. I'd known the sentencing was today, but hearing it made it real in a way that surprised me. They were going to prison. The women who'd tried to take everything from me would spend the next decade behind bars. "How do you feel?" Janet asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I just feel tired. That's normal. You've been fighting for 2 years straight. Your body probably doesn't know what to do without the adrenaline." She was right. The custody case was resolved. I had full custody with no supervision requirements. The property lawsuit was settled. The criminal cases were concluded. There was nothing left to fight for, except building a life. Thompson Manufacturing, which I'd renamed Pierce Industries in honor of Samuel Pierce, was thriving under new management. I'd kept it as a silent owner, using the profits to fund community programs and small business loans for people who'd been overlooked by traditional banks. People like I'd been. The cottage had become something of a landmark. Tour groups from the museum sometimes stopped by, and I'd give them the full story. The hidden gold, the letter, the truth that had been buried for 80 years. Leah had started giving tours herself, proud to tell people about the brave man who'd built our home. Blake was too young to understand most of it, but he knew his father had been a good man who'd been hurt by bad people, and he knew that his mother had fought back. That was enough for now. "There's something else," Janet said. "The Pierce family wants to host a dedication ceremony at the museum. They're unveiling a permanent exhibit about you and what you did. They want you to speak." "About what?" "About survival. About justice. About what it means to fight back when the world tells you you're powerless." I looked at my children playing in the garden, healthy and happy and safe. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, broke and desperate, with $23 and 2 hungry babies. I thought about the woman I'd become, stronger, wealthier, but also lonelier. The fight had cost me something I wasn't sure I could get back. "I'll do it," I said, "but on one condition. I want to set up a fund to help other people in situations like mine. Women who've lost everything, who are being crushed by people with more money and power. I want to give them what Samuel Pierce gave me, the means to fight back." "I think that's perfect," Janet said. "I'll start drawing up the paperwork." The dedication ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in October, exactly 2 years after Benjamin died. The museum was packed, journalists, historians, community leaders, and dozens of people I'd never met who'd been following the story. Diana Pierce Robinson introduced me with words that made me cry. "Martha Thompson didn't just expose a historical injustice," she said. "She proved that one person with courage and truth on their side can dismantle an empire built on lies. She proved that the people society discards are often the ones who change it. And she proved that my great-grandfather's faith in justice wasn't misplaced. It just took time." I walked to the podium and looked out at the crowd. There were faces I recognized, business owners who'd refused me credit, people who'd turned their backs when the Thompsons told them to, neighbors who'd watched me struggle and done nothing. But there were also faces I didn't recognize. Young women, many of them black and brown, looking at me with something like hope. "My name is Martha Warren Thompson," I began. "And 2 years ago, I was given a cottage that was supposed to break me. Instead, it saved me. But I'm not here to talk about what I did. I'm here to talk about what Samuel Pierce did." I told his story. The stolen land. The hidden gold. the letter that said, "For whoever finds this, use it to make sure the truth comes to light." Samuel Pierce died believing that justice was impossible for people like him, for people like us. But he was wrong. Justice isn't impossible. It's just hard. It's slow. It requires sacrifice and courage, and a willingness to stand up even when everyone tells you to sit down. I paused, looking at the young women in the front row. If you're in a situation where someone powerful is trying to destroy you, where you feel like you have no options and no hope, I want you to know something. You are not powerless. You are not worthless. And you are not alone. The Martha Pierce Foundation will provide legal support, financial assistance, and strategic guidance to anyone fighting against institutional injustice. Because Samuel Pierce left me more than gold. He left me a lesson. That truth buried is still truth. And it always, always finds a way to rise. The applause was deafening. But the best part came after, when women lined up to talk to me, to tell me their stories, to ask for help. I helped every single one of them. Over the next year, the foundation grew. We helped 12 women escape abusive situations. We funded legal battles against employers who discriminated. We exposed 3 cases of property fraud similar to what the Thompsons had done. And I finally started to heal. The anger that had fueled me for so long began to fade, replaced by something quieter but stronger. Purpose. The understanding that what had happened to me, terrible as it was, had given me a platform to help others. I started dating again. Nothing serious, but it felt good to remember that I was more than just a widow and a warrior. I was a woman who deserved softness and joy. Leah thrived in school. She told everyone about her father, keeping his memory alive in a way that was healthy and honest. And when she was old enough to understand everything, I would tell her the whole truth about how he died and how I'd fought to make it right. Blake asked about his father sometimes, mostly through pictures. "That's Daddy," he'd say, pointing. "He loved us." "He did," I'd tell him. "So much." On the 2nd anniversary of Benjamin's death, I took the children to his grave. It had a proper headstone now, one that told the truth. Benjamin Thompson, beloved father and husband, murdered for choosing love over hate. 1985 to 2023. We brought flowers. Leah drew him a picture. Blake sang him a song he'd learned in preschool. And I told Benjamin about everything that had happened, about the justice we'd won, about the lives we'd changed, about the children he'd never see grow up, but who carried his kindness in them every day. "We did it," I whispered. "We won." As we walked back to the car, Leah took my hand. "Mama, are you still sad?" "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But I'm also happy. Both things can be true. Like how the cottage was broken, but now it's beautiful. Exactly like that, baby." That night, after the children were asleep, I sat in Samuel Pierce's reading room, the one he'd built in the cottage in 1943, and wrote him a letter. I didn't know if he could read it wherever he was, but it felt important to tell him what his courage had made possible. "Dear Samuel Pierce, you left gold in this ceiling for whoever found it. You left a letter that said to use it to make sure the truth came to light. I found your gold. I read your letter, and I did exactly what you asked. The Thompson family has fallen. Your land has been restored to your family, and your name is honored. But more than that, your faith in justice has inspired hundreds of people to fight back against the systems that tried to crush them. You didn't die believing justice was impossible. You died planting seeds that took 80 years to bloom. Thank you for building this cottage. Thank you for hiding the truth. Thank you for believing that someday, someone would find it and have the courage to use it. I hope I've made you proud. With gratitude and respect, Martha." I folded the letter and placed it in the fireplace where I'd found his original letter. Someday, maybe someone else would find it and know the full story. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I looked around the cottage one more time. This place that had been given to me as garbage. This place that had held a fortune. This place that had changed everything. The Thompsons had tried to bury me in poverty and shame. Instead, they'd given me exactly what I needed to destroy them. They'd handed me the key to their downfall and called it worthless. I smiled in the dark. "You buried your riches in the dirt you gave me," I whispered to the ghosts of the Thompsons. "And I grew it into my empire. And that empire, built not on stolen land but on truth and justice, would stand for generations. Because that's what happens when you try to bury people who are seeds. They don't stay buried. They grow.